From the KTVB News Group, this is a Decision 2020 special. The race for U.S. Congress in Idaho's 2nd District. Incumbent Republican Mike Simpson is running for his 12th term in Congress. Democratic candidate and economist Aaron Swisher is hoping to take his place. The two squaring off in a debate on the issues that matter to you. Now, here is our moderator, News Channel 7's Kim Fields.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's debate. We are glad that you've decided to join us for the hour because our goal here is to help Idahoans make an informed decision this election season. The two candidates participating want your vote for Congress in District 2, a voting area that covers eastern Idaho westward to include most of Boise. The candidates will introduce themselves in just a moment, but first, we want to tell you about the format of tonight's debate. We have a team working behind the scenes to ensure our candidates get equal time to speak. We also want to encourage free-flowing discussion while we make sure that we're staying on topic. So here are the ground rules for tonight. Our candidates will each have 1 minute for opening statements. They'll have up to 2 minutes to answer each question and roughly 1 minute for rebuttal and 1 minute for closing statements. Now for introductions. I'm joined tonight by three of my colleagues, KTVB journalist Mark Johnson, Doug Petcash, and Joe Paris. Now it's time for our two candidates to introduce themselves. Representative Mike Simpson and Mr. Aaron Swisher are joining us virtually due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Gentlemen, you each have 1 minute for your opening statement. Earlier, a coin flip determined that Mr. Swisher will go first.
Well, thank you, and thank KTVB, the questioners, and the moderator for tonight's debate. I want to start by giving a little credit to my opponent, Congressman Mike Simpson. There are actually 3 federal races in Idaho this year, 2 congressional races and a Senate race. But the debate that you'll see tonight and that we had last week are the only ones that you'll see because Congressman Russ Fulcher and Senator Jim Risch have declined the opportunity to come before the voters and defend their voting positions. I don't know these gentlemen, so I don't know if they feel entitled to their positions or they're simply afraid of facing the Idaho voters, but I know that Idahoans deserve better. Congressman Simpson and I have our differences. Some of those are very important and will hopefully be brought out tonight. That's why I'm in this race. But I appreciate the fact that we both come to the process with a modicum of decency and respect. We don't call each other names or willfully misrepresent each other's positions on the issues. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Swisher, thank you. And now we'll go to Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Kim, and thank KTVB for hosting this debate, and to you for moderating it, and for the panelists for being out there in the virtual world somewhere. But I appreciate you doing this. And I want to thank Aaron for running and for being here tonight. You know, an election is about the competition of ideas. And of course, if no one's running against you, then it's hard to get those different ideas out there. Elections, though, when an incumbent is running, seem to always be about the record of the incumbent. Is he representing the district in a way that the people can be proud of? You know, I've got a long history representing the 2nd District of Idaho, and I think I've got accomplishments that I am very proud of, and I think the people of Idaho can be proud of. And I look forward to discussing those this evening and the other issues that might come up. So thank you for being here, and thank you for providing this forum for this debate.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Let's get started now. And we will begin with the topic on top of a lot of minds right now, and that is COVID-19. My colleague Doug Petcash has the first question. Doug?
Kim, thank you, and Congressman and Mr. Swisher, thank you again for participating in tonight's debate. Of course, coronavirus has dominated the headlines now for 7 months. According to Johns Hopkins University, the United States has nearly 8 million cases of coronavirus. 215,000 people have died of COVID-related illness. According to the state of Idaho, the Gem State has nearly 50,000 cases and more than 500 deaths. My question for you, starting with you, Mr. Swisher, is what do you think of the federal response to coronavirus so far, and what do you think needs to be done going forward?
I think the federal response has actually been pretty poor. I would never expect the federal government to handle this type of thing perfectly. We only go through something of this magnitude. The last time we went through it was 100 years ago. So I wouldn't expect the federal government under Democrat or Republican to handle this in a perfect manner. But when the coronavirus came out, when the pandemic started, we didn't really know what we were dealing with. So at the very least, what we should have done was taken the situation seriously and admonished the American people to take the situation seriously until we figured out exactly what we were dealing with. The president didn't do that. He did a hoax. He tried to play it up for political purposes. And now that we do know what we're dealing with, we can't get a certain segment of the American population to help us get the thing under control because they're still downplaying it just as the president downplayed it. That is a problem. That is a failure of leadership from the executive branch of this government. You know, I know that we were maybe short on some supplies, short on testing, things of that sort. You're always going to have situations like that. We as the American people could have overcome that had we had leadership from the top that had taken this seriously, but we didn't have that leadership. The president simply wanted to play this situation for his own political gain. He was worried about, what this situation might do to his brand, so to speak. And now we've got, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans who are endangered by this thing. And it's obviously hurting our economy more so than it really would have had we handled the thing properly. So I would give the president some sort of failing grade for this.
I believe you've probably used up most of your time there, but I need to ask you the second part of that question again. What do you think needs to be done going forward from here to improve the situation?
Well, we've got to get the thing under control, which means people need to wear their masks when they're in public buildings. They need to wear their mask when they're in a public space with a lot of people and they can't properly social distance. Obviously, you've got to wash your hands and practice good hygiene. And really, I think if we do that, we can't have the economy opened up 100%, but we can have it opened up most of the way. But there are a lot of folks in our society that just don't want to do that because the president kind of convinced them that it was a hoax from the beginning.
Congressman Simpson, same questions to you there. What do you think of the federal response to coronavirus so far, and what do you believe needs to be done going forward?
Well, obviously, it's tragic that we have lost the number of people that we have and that we haven't controlled this yet. And we're working hard to get a vaccine. And ultimately, that's the way you're going to control it, is to get a vaccine for this country. The president has put Operation Warp Speed into effect. He's also invoked the Defense Authorization Act the Defense Production Act to make sure that we had the supplies that were necessary. I actually think that the federal government did a pretty decent job when we started with this. If you look, Congress passed like 3 bills almost unanimously to address the needs that the American people were going to have. Aaron is right. The stockpile of our supplies was depleted during the H1 crisis that we had several years ago and never replenished. But you'll notice nobody has gone without a ventilator that needed one. Everybody was saying how terrible it was that people were going to go without ventilators. That didn't happen. People had masks and all of that kind of stuff. Today, for the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, the experts were saying you didn't need to wear masks. The experts were saying that. Now they've come around and said you need to wear masks. I just saw a report the other day that said 85% of the people that have got COVID in the last, couple months, 85% of them either wore a mask all the time or almost all the time. So there's a question among the public about how effective masks are. I wear one just because I know, I don't know whether they're effective or not, but it doesn't hurt to wear one. And I wish more people would do it. But I think the federal response has been pretty decent, given that we really didn't know how serious this was. When the president banned travel from China, he was called a racist and a xenophobic by the people now saying, oh, he should have done it sooner. So he's getting criticized on a lot of fronts that I don't think are justified. What we need to do looking forward now is to proceed with finding this vaccine and the therapeutics that are working to control the virus. And we also need Congress to pass another relief bill. And there's debate right now about how big that should be, what it should address. But we need to extend the unemployment insurance, and we need to extend the PPP program to help those small businesses so that they can retain their employees. But unfortunately, that bipartisanship that existed at the very first of this, when we passed 3 bills, has vanished. And now it has become all partisan, and that's unfortunate.
Representative Simpson, let me go back to masks. You said you wish more people would do it. Yes or no, should masks be mandated?
I wouldn't mandate masks, but I would encourage people to wear them if they're in the situations that they're going to be around people, that they, as Aaron said, they need to social distance, they need to wash their hands, they need to be cognizant of the fact and respect this disease, that it can be very serious if you get it. I had an aunt that died from COVID about 3 weeks ago, and it's a devastating disease, and we hope that we can control it. But like I say, the only way you're going to totally get it under control is by the vaccine. But yes, masks, I believe, should be worn just as a matter of common sense.
But you don't believe should be mandated?
I wouldn't mandate that,
okay.
no.
Mr. Swisher, the question to you, do you believe that masks should be mandated?
Well, the White House's own coronavirus task force has suggested that states mandate masks, and if need be, enforce that with a fine in order to get compliance. I do think people should wear masks. I think it helps deter the spread. I want to touch on a couple points that Congressman Simpson made. A lot has been made of the president's travel ban from China. Even after the travel ban, there were hundreds of flights that came from China and tens of thousands of people. So it wasn't a complete ban. And if you look at the outbreak of the virus in New York, which was one of the original hotspots, that came from Europe. And so I don't think there's any way that you can look at the federal response and say, yeah, we did a good job with this. Once again, I wouldn't expect it to be perfect, but there are some obvious ways in which our government from the top down failed us in this pandemic.
So again, yes or no on the mask mandate from you, Mr. Swisher?
I do think you should have some sort of mandate.
Okay.
Look, if you go to some place like China or Japan or any of the Asian nations, anybody who has a cold is wearing a mask, not for themselves, but for everybody else. That's all that we're asking people to do, is just think of their fellow human beings, think of their fellow citizens. The fact that we can't get people to do this is really astounding.
All right, Mr. Swisher, thank you. Let's continue to stay on the topic of coronavirus. As I mentioned at the top of the debate, it is top of mind for so many Idahoans. Yeah. But let's move on to another issue on the coronavirus. And Joe, you have a question now that you can chime in with.
Thanks, Kim. Well, medical experts have said for months that to get out of the coronavirus pandemic, a successful vaccine is absolutely key. With that in mind, a report done by Pew Research from September shows that there's a significant distrust in the government, specifically the federal government right now. People just aren't sure what to think. Now, with that said, how do you convince people across the United States to trust the government and to take a vaccine to move everyone out of the pandemic? Without a successful vaccine, without enough people taking it, it's pointless. Mr. Swisher, what do you do about the distrust in the federal government?
Well, all of us and all of our elected officials really need to help build faith and trust in the federal government and the institutions, the nonpartisan institutions that are there for our benefit. Unfortunately, you have an executive that is telling us that we shouldn't trust the government, that we is kind of encouraging us not to trust things like the Postal Service, the voting system, the CDC and the FTC. This is a serious problem. These institutions, are there for our benefit. They're not to be politicized. And unfortunately, we've got a president who is politicizing them, hoping that it is going to bring him some sort of political gain. That is the problem from the top down. There's always going to be a certain segment of folks who don't trust the government, and we should all, to some degree, be skeptical. But we have an administration that is just breeding fear and mistrust of the basic civil servants that go out every day to help our citizenry and protect the country.
And Congressman Simpson, obviously you work for the federal government, you represent Idahoans. How can you convince people watching tonight that they can trust the federal government and their rollout of a vaccine?
Well, you're never going to convince everybody. There's some people that don't take vaccines now for polio and other things. They think vaccines are wrong. That's just some of the American people. That's their freedom to make those decisions. But when you got a vice presidential candidate saying, oh, I wouldn't trust the government and I wouldn't take the vaccine if it was developed, who's undermining the credibility of the CDC and the Food and Drug Administration that will have to approve these vaccines? I said the other night that if a vaccine becomes available and the FDA has approved it, I will take it immediately, and I would encourage other people to do it. But the criticism that Mr. Swisher seems to place on the president for everything that he does and sees through this whole pandemic, I get a kick out of listening to the Democrats say, "Oh, it's been terrible. The response has been terrible. The federal government hasn't done their job." It seems to me that the only thing, but when you ask them, what would have you done differently? They have no ideas of what they would have done differently. It seems like the only thing they want to do is shut down our economy and open our border. And that's a problem, frankly.
Mr. Swisher, do you have a response to that? This is kind of a lively discussion right now. Do you have a response?
Absolutely. The first thing I'd have done was tell the American people to take it seriously, not tell them it's a hoax. If the vice presidential candidate from the Democratic side has said that she won't take the vaccine, I am not aware of that. And I would oppose her if she did say that. I will take the vaccine when it's available because I trust our government and I trust those institutions that are there to protect us, as long as they are not being politicized. I'm not here to kind of let the president go free. There are serious problems with his response to this. He was playing it for political purposes. That was obvious.
Congressman Simpson, was your party, President Trump, were you playing it for political purposes?
Nobody was playing this for political purposes. Anybody that thinks that the coronavirus helps them politically is crazy. We are desperately trying to solve this problem and desperately trying to find the vaccine that I would encourage every American to take. And if you haven't seen your vice presidential candidate, you should have watched the debate. She said it on the debate, and she said it several other times, as have other leading Democrats, that, "Oh, I don't believe we should take that vaccine because I don't trust President Trump." Well, it's going to be developed by companies, private companies. It's going to be approved by the FDA and the CDC. So that they're undermining the credibility of the very institutions that Mr. Swisher and I both agree need the public support and need the public confidence.
Okay, let's move on. We'll take a question now from Mark.
All right, let's talk about economics now. And Congressman Simpson, you touched on this minutes ago. You've been working on helping small businesses out during the pandemic. We've seen a lot of stories and done them about large businesses with thousands of employees getting aid, while some small businesses right here said they didn't get it. You just signed the discharge petition for small businesses, which calls for an extension of the PPP through the end of this year. The question, what assurances do those businesses who need it have that they'll get access to it before it goes back to the Shake Shacks and Ruth Chris's of the world again?
Well, the PPP program that was originally put in, we knew that there would be challenges in getting that money out. It went out through the Small Business Administration, and this is the first time we've ever done anything like this. There were normally the Small Business Administration deals with about 1,700 lending institutions that work with them on a regular basis, that know their procedures and so forth. They're now dealing with over 6,000 lending institutions. So we knew that there would be errors, there'd be mistakes, that type of stuff. Our hope is to correct those in another COVID relief bill. But there is $143 billion that is sitting in the PPP program that has not been spent, that has not been released to these businesses. And the program expired October 1st. What we want on our discharge petition is to say extend that deadline so that that $143 billion can get out and used for what it was intended to be used for. So far, Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats have not been willing to just extend that deadline to use the money that's already been appropriated because they want ballot harvesting and they want all the other stuff that they put in their Crazy Heroes bill.
Mr. Swisher, you're an economist. You know the divide between the GOP and the Democrats on this. What say you?
I think we have a general problem in Washington. Anytime the government is handing out money, the biggest and most profitable corporations are going to be there at the trough trying to get their share of it. And I can appreciate some of the things that the Congress did to try to make sure some of this money went to small businesses. But the problem really is that our economy was weak from the get-go. Folks will tell you that it was very strong, but if people don't have good paychecks to where they can save for rainy days or events like this, then when events like this happen, we're all reliant on the federal government, and you're going to have the problems that are there when the federal government is handing out money. What I would have liked to see, and what I was advocating 2 years ago and have advocated for decades, is an economy that is more fair to working people so they can meet their general needs. They can add some spending, some discretionary spending to drive the economy. They can also save for rainy days. If we had all gone into this pandemic with the 3 to 6 month savings that financial advisors suggest people have, we may not have even needed a government stimulus. But almost 50%, roughly 50% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. So they're not going to have 3 to 6 months of savings that they can tap into in an emergency like this. There's always going to be problems when the government is handing out money, and we really need to find a better way of setting ourselves up for these problems, which are going to come.
All right, along those lines, this is a big topic, and we would be remiss if we didn't touch on this. We heard Joe Biden and Kamala Harris talk about not raising taxes for anyone making under $400,000. Now, Mr. Swisher, you've gone a bit farther, saying your plan is to cut taxes on anyone making $500K or less and raise taxes on anyone making $1 million or more. You talk about closing loopholes for the rich, the CEOs, while also raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. You're looking to be elected to office for the very first time. Those are three very, very big proposals that haven't gotten very far in Washington. Why would you succeed, and where would you start?
Well, Washington has been led for a while now by people that really concentrate on helping those at the top and not those at the bottom. And we really need to change that focus and that attitude. Look, the way our economy is set up, all of the money, it eventually ends up going to the top anyway. So anytime you're going to help the general society, you shouldn't try and help them from a top-down perspective. You should start at the bottom, because that money eventually is going to go to the top anyway. You're right. There are different proposals in Washington and different ideas of who should maybe pay more taxes and who should pay less. My proposals are a little different than what it sounds like Biden and Harris are proposing, but they're generally the same. We recognize that the working class Americans have kind of been shafted by this economy. They need a simpler tax system where they're paying lower taxes, and that includes a lot of small businesses. But on the other hand, we've got a lot of CEOs who have been shipping our jobs overseas for their own economic benefit. They've been backdating their stock options. They've been engaging in all sorts of corrupt and greedy behavior to bring in millions of dollars that they essentially haven't earned. If we raise taxes on that income, above $1 million a year, we will eliminate all that greedy and corrupt behavior that's been undermining our economy.
Mm-hmm. All right, Congressman Simpson, a lot to unpack there. How much do you align with the Donald J. Trump feelings of economics?
Well, let me put it this way. When Donald Trump inherited this economy, it was growing at about a 1.8% rate, which is the slowest recovery we've had since the Great Depression. And they were very proud of that 1.8% growth. Donald Trump came in, reduced regulations, reduced taxes, got the economy growing again. It was about 2.8%. So the economy was growing. And when you look at the tax cuts that we enacted under the Trump administration, the largest percentage increase in income went to the lowest part of the tax bracket. It wasn't the upper part that got the highest part of the tax bracket. It was the lowest part that their share of increase in return was on the lowest end. Should have been more. We could discuss that. But every time we reduce taxes, when we did it with the Bush tax cuts back in 01 or 02, everybody said, oh, it just went to the rich. The reality is that if you looked at taxes paid to the United States government, the higher income people paid more of a percentage of the taxes than the lower income people did after the tax cuts. So were the tax cuts fair? I think they were. And I think those people that got a tax break would be very happy with the tax cuts they got and the increase in the child tax credit and other things. When the Democrats say, are they going to repeal the Trump tax cuts and they're not going to increase taxes on anybody, that's just false. You're going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. You're going to repeal the doubling of the child tax credit. That's going to be a tax that's going to hit every family. So I don't go along with their economics. The reality is that we had a strong, growing economy before the pandemic hit and put the world economy in debt.
Okay, we do need to move on. We're going to stay on the theme of the economy, though. But Doug, you have the next question.
Yeah, a direct question about the minimum wage. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It has been for quite a while. Congressman Simpson, is it time for the federal minimum wage to be increased? And could that even be done in Washington with the climate right now?
I don't know that anything could be done right now with the climate in Washington, but I wouldn't go out and impose that minimum wage on small businesses that are trying to get back on their feet. When you talk about the difference between large businesses who got some of the PPP program and small businesses, I'll tell you that employee that worked for a large corporation, his job is just as important as the person that works for a small business also. And what this was done is to make sure that employers kept employees on the payroll and didn't send them, they didn't lose their job. And that's what that was intended for. But to impose the minimum wage on small businesses now, I think would be a huge mistake.
And for you, Mr. Swisher, should the minimum wage be increased?
Yeah, and I'm going to approach this by talking about something that Congressman Simpson brought up. He said that the Obama recovery was the slowest recovery we'd ever seen. And that's right, it is. Do you know what the second slowest recovery was? The Bush recovery of the early part of this century. You know what the third slowest recovery was? The Clinton recovery of the early 90s. The reason that these recoveries get slower and slower is not because Obama had a poor economic plan. It's because income disparity is getting worse and worse. It makes everything harder to solve. So yes, we need to raise wages. We need to raise them from the bottom up. We need to make sure that people who are going to work 40 hours a week can meet their basic minimum needs and hopefully also have some discretionary spending left over to help drive the economy. Mike Simpson thinks you grow the economy by giving people tax cuts. You can't always give tax cuts. What happens once the tax rates hit zero? You don't have any place to go. The best way to grow the economy is to make sure that people drive the economy with their consumer spending because they have a good paycheck, a good fair paycheck from the job they work. If you're trying to drive the economy through continual tax cuts, having the Fed print more and more money, or having the government give out more and more programs, you're not getting the economics right. We need better wages in this country, and it's time to raise the minimum wage.
Mr. Simpson, I want to give you a chance to respond to that. Do you have a response? Yeah.
Let me respond to that. I would think that the economist would understand that the way you drive wages is by increased competition. You get unemployment low. When you got unemployment down at 3 or 4%, guess what? The competition for those employees increases, and employers have to pay more in wages in order to maintain those employees. And that's what you saw happening. That's the way you increase wages, not by the government coming in and mandating what you have to pay and so forth.
Okay, I like a good lively debate. I see you raising your hand there, Mr. Swisher. Go for it.
Yes, he made this same point 2 years ago, and he was right at the time. Wages were coming up, but then wages dropped off and actually fell from then until the end of 2019, even though unemployment was tight. So yes, theoretically, a tight labor market does drive up wages, but it doesn't work all the time, and it doesn't work perfectly. The government should set a floor under wages to make sure that all Americans working 40 hours a week can meet their basic minimum needs. Look, this keeps them from being reliant on the federal government. That's what conservatives want. I just don't see how Congressman Simpson can be so opposed to this when the ultimate outcome is the thing that his party has been clamoring for.
Okay, Mr. Swisher, I need to cut you there. We do only have an hour tonight. I say I like a lively debate, but we still only have 1 hour. And we do want to make sure that we include as many topics as possible. So let's kind of keep this going with another topic. So Mark, I'll let you ask the next question.
Okay, let's move to education. Idaho, as you both know, has for a long time ranked at or among the bottom in the country for funding for our students. The national average is around $13,000 a student. We're right at $7,000, and our classrooms reflect that, with many of our teachers forced to purchase their own materials for their classroom from their own pockets. It's primarily a state budget issue, as the Constitution mandates, but with tens of billions of dollars of federal money going to fund public schools, a lot of it coming right here, how engaged are you, or will you be, on this really, really critical issue for Idaho? Congressman Simpson, we'll start with you.
Well, you're right when you say it is primarily a state issue. Education is primarily a state issue. Federal government has a role in funding for, like, the IDEA program, and we've always said that we would pay 14% of the cost, and we've never even approached half of that. So I've been pushing, as have other members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, for the federal government to meet that requirement that we've imposed, that we pay for those things that the federal government imposes on local school districts. The challenge is, talk to most superintendents and stuff, they will tell you that about 5% of their funding comes from the federal government, but about 95% of their regulations come from the federal government. We need to let the states control education, and the federal government should pay for those things, as I said, that we impose with federal law.
Mr. Swisher.
Well, I actually kind of agree with Congressman Simpson on this. For the most part, it is a state budget issue, and the state of Idaho really needs to get its priorities in order and start to prioritize the education of our kids. I don't think the federal government is supplying the funding that they should be supplying, and they should actually do better, providing that money to the states. If you want to do that without any strings, so be it. But I think the federal government does have to come up with a little more cash.
I want to chime in here. I'm a parent of 3 Idaho school students, and I'm concerned about funding, as are a lot of parents. But right now, when we're thinking education, we're thinking COVID-19. I want to ask Representative Simpson first. Should schools be fully reopened right now with in-person learning?
I'm not in a position to make that determination. That should be left to the state of Idaho, to the local school districts, and the parents and teachers of how and when they want to reopen the school district. I think the government, one of the things that we will want to put in our Corona package, if we can get one done, and I suspect we will after this election, would be to help the schools financially, because we've learned a lot through this. We need to increase our funding for broadband, because we found that the students, when they go out and try to virtually learn, they don't have access to broadband in a lot of rural Idaho and stuff. So across this country, we need to increase funding for broadband, and I think you'll see that in any future endeavor. But to whether schools ought to open, it's so different across this country, and it's so different across this state. I'm sure there are some schools that could open and do it in person, and others that probably should still be doing it by virtual learning. So I would leave that to the state and local people.
Mr. Swisher, same question to you. Should schools be fully reopened right now with in-person learning?
I also agree that it's a case-by-case basis, based upon locality. I think the federal government should give some guidelines and some advice to state and local governments, but ultimately it depends upon the situation in that area where the school is. This is one of those areas where we could invest in if we weren't continually giving more and more tax cuts to rich people. We have just cut the revenue for the federal government down to the bone. We're not paying our bills as it is. And then we have people from the bottom up saying, hey, we need more money for things like education and transportation and infrastructure. And there's just no money because the government has just constantly given tax cuts to the folks at the top. That's really what we have to stop doing.
Okay. As I said, I want to try to get to as many topics as possible. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about the issue of healthcare now. And for that, we turn to our Joe Paris for the next question. Joe?
Well, a big conversation across our country right now, the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare. The Supreme Court is set to take up the case coming up on November 11th. It's well documented that for years now, Republicans, some have said that the Affordable Care Act is terrible and that it needs to be repealed and replaced with something else. So my question first to you, Mr. Swisher, should the Affordable Care Act be replaced? And if so, what is a better idea in its place?
I am not for repealing the Affordable Care Act. If we do replace it, we have to replace it with something that is better and stronger. And I haven't heard any ideas coming from the Republican side of the aisle, unfortunately. They have been fighting, Congressman Simpson included, for over a decade now to repeal this thing, not trim it, not trim around the edges or keep the good parts and get rid of the bad parts, but get rid of the whole thing. Congressman Simpson has voted over 60 times to repeal this bill. And now they've got this train rolling to the point where it's not even in their hands. Like you said, the Supreme Court is going to rule on this right after the election. And if they get their way, they're going to have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of folks here in Idaho who voted for the Medicaid expansion, which was part of the Affordable Care Act. There's 90,000 Idahoans who have health care today that didn't have it before because of that Medicaid expansion. They're going to lose their health care. That's a serious issue. Congressman Simpson has health care. He has health care paid for by the taxpayers, and it's probably pretty nice. But Republicans don't want other people to have health care paid for by the taxpayers for some reason. Look, my wife has been battling breast cancer this year, and she's going to beat it. But let's assume at some point she wants to switch jobs and therefore switch insurance. If you lose the provision that prevents people with pre-existing conditions from getting health insurance or being covered under their new health insurance, if her cancer crops back up, that could be considered a pre-existing condition. That's a serious problem that a lot of Americans face. The Affordable Care Act fixed that, and Republicans want to get rid of it.
Congressman Simpson, to you now, what do you believe should be the fate of the Affordable Care Act? Does it need to be replaced, and if so, with what?
Yeah, I do think it needs to be replaced, but first let me correct a mistake that Mr. Swisher made. I don't know if you understand this. I pay $10,000 a year in premiums for my health care. $10,000 a year, over $10,000. And it's a $5,000 deductible. I am on the District of Columbia Health Exchange, Obamacare. In fact, when I wanted to join the Idaho Healthcare Exchange, I couldn't because the law required me and my employees, even those that work in Idaho, to be on the District of Columbia Health Exchange. That's how crazy this law is. But it is a law that is going to fail on its own because of its own weight. The reality is when this was sold to the American people, it was, if you like your doctor, you can keep them. If you like your health care plan, you can keep them. It's going to save the average family $2,500 a year. None of that was true. Obama kept repeating it. His advisors said, don't say that anymore because it's not true, but he kept repeating it. That's how it was sold to the American people. And when we talk about the number of people that have gained access to health care under Obamacare, the reality is there's even more people that have lost their health care, but they don't say they're uninsured. They say they're self-insured, but they've lost their health care plans because of Obamacare. What we need is a health care plan that puts more competition in the marketplace. That's what keeps prices down. Right now, over half the counties in America have one option. That's not competition. I just saw Joe Biden, his digital ad that it comes out and it says, Biden's health care plan, more competition, lower prices. That's what they said 10 years ago when they enacted Obamacare, and just the opposite has happened. There are provisions of the Obamacare legislation that Republicans support. Pre-existing conditions, not being able to discriminate against people. There is a bill in Congress that I am a co-sponsor of. There's a bill that we passed in the House 2 years ago that made sure that people with pre-existing conditions were covered, that wasn't held against them. It also made sure that we didn't discriminate against women. It also made sure that you could stay on your employer or your parents' health insurance until you were 26. Those are bills that I'm co-sponsor of. Those provisions will remain, but the Democrats are trying to scare the hell out of the American people, saying, oh, if you got a pre-existing condition, they're going to take away your health care. That's just simply not true. I don't know how this is going to come out on this Supreme Court decision. I don't know how any one of these people are going to rule on it. I don't know about the current nominee before the Supreme Court, how she would rule on it. So we'll just have to see how it works.
Mr. Swisher, are you trying to scare the hell out of people?
I am not. Look, if they get their way and the Affordable Care Act is repealed, it doesn't matter how many bills Congressman Simpson has, drawn up. They're not going to be passed right away, and people are going to lose their health care. That's what Republicans wanted. They wanted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They can flip-flop now and change their position and say, well, no, we've always liked certain parts of it. But that's not what they've been trying to do. They've been trying to repeal the whole thing for over a decade now. Look, there was consolidation in the healthcare industry and rising premiums long before Obamacare came in. So to suggest that the Affordable Care Act caused these things and reduced competition simply isn't true. Yeah, we need more competition, but we also need a mechanism in place that gives people, buyers in the marketplace, more power when they go to negotiate for healthcare prices. In my mind, that is a single-payer system, but the Republicans will not let us have that.
Okay, all right. Gentlemen, I do want to move on.
Could we respond to that?
Mr. Simpson, go ahead.
Single payer system, health care for all. That's a beautiful idea. $32 trillion is what it's estimated to cost over the next 10 years. That doubles the amount of total spending that the federal government does. $32 trillion. And that's not even half of it, I don't believe, because if you ask any hospital administrator, the way they think they're going to do it cheaper is because Medicare reimbursement rates are much lower than what are normal charges. If you ask any hospital administrator, if you got reimbursed at the Medicare rate for all of your procedures, what would happen? Every single one of them will tell you that their hospital would close, which means you're going to pay more than the Medicare rates in order to keep those open. So I think the $32 trillion is a vast underestimation of what would happen. And if you like the way the government runs things, I don't know that you want the government running your healthcare system. Just go to a foreign country and look at their healthcare system. I've been to a country where you go to one of their top hospitals, people are laying in the aisles on gurneys because there's no rooms available. And you talk to the administrators and they'll say, there's no incentive for us to build additional rooms in these hospitals because of the National Healthcare Plan. Why do you think so many Canadians come to the United States to get healthcare? So many doctors come from Canada to practice in the United States.
Okay, we
need to improve our system.
Representative Simpson, let me give Mr. Swisher, I'll give you a chance to respond, but just 30 seconds. Let's keep it tight and move on.
Yes, certainly. I think as a nation, we're already spending more than the $32 trillion that Congressman Simpson is talking about, and the government's already on the hook for 2/3 of that. The other point I would make is that hospitals are already closing in rural areas, so the system that we have isn't working. And I'm not talking about government-run healthcare. That is what Republicans are trying to scare you about. That's not what this is. You still get your health care from the hospital. You still get it from your doctor, but the payment mechanism is from the government, which gives you more negotiating power.
Okay, all right, gentlemen. I'm making a note to self here. Next year's debate, or 2 years from now, will be 2 hours. So yes, we're covering a lot of ground, but we need to keep it moving. Next question is going on over to Doug. Doug.
This is certainly not a topic that's probably going to be a quick answer. It's a huge topic, very serious, been dominating the headlines since early this year in the spring, and that is racial injustice and policing. I want to start with you, Congressman Simpson. What do you think needs to be done about racial injustice in the country and policing at this time?
That's an important question. Before I answer, I have to say on that last answer, if you think that the entity that doesn't pay the bill, that pays the bill, doesn't have control of the system, obviously the government would have control of the system. They would determine what they pay for, and what they pay and what they don't pay for. It would be a government-controlled healthcare system. Policing and what's going on. It was terrible what happened to George Floyd and stuff, and those policemen should be brought up on charges, which they are. But I have been very concerned about what's happening to our major cities around this country, whether it's New York, Chicago, Seattle, Portland, the riots that are happening, the burning of our cities, and in fact the concern that the police are not being allowed to do their job. 99.999% of the police officers are good people. They're just trying to do their job. They're trying to protect our communities. They're our neighbors, our friends, and those types of things. but they are being prevented from doing that by an awful lot of mayors and governors in a lot of these cities. And defunding the police is the wrong answer for this. It's absolutely the wrong answer for that, but that's what a lot of the Democratic Party wants to do. You know, the reason we can't get the Homeland Security bill passed is because it has funding for the COPS program in it, and also has funding for ICE and for Customs and Border Patrol. And the Democrats in the House won't vote for that, so they couldn't get the votes for it. We had a program, there is a program that helps train police officers called the COPS program, and they can apply for grants for that. Part of that is to harden schools, so schools could apply for that, so that they could put in bulletproof glass and other things and harden their schools. We had an amendment to say, okay, if you want to take these requirements out for the cops and make them do certain things, let's at least exempt out the schools so that they can still apply for these grants for hardening. Every single Democrat on the Appropriations Committee voted against that. They wanted to hold our children hostage until they got their way with their programs for reforming the police officers. I think it's terrible what's been happening, but we need to stand behind our police officers.
I want to get Mr. Swisher's take on this in a minute, but first, Congressman, I do want to follow up with, how do you feel about putting more resources toward programs for civil discourse, civil discussion, changing police tactics, more community policing, and that sort of thing?
I think that's always a good idea. I think policemen ought to, and police departments ought to engage with their community and try to talk about what they do and why they're there and how they protect their communities. I think discussion is always a good idea. And in fact, one of the things that I would do is to be available for a lot of the COPS programs. I think they need to be certified police departments. Not very many, I shouldn't say not very many, but a lot of the large police departments aren't certified by the association that certifies police departments. And so I think going through that training and so forth, it would be a very valuable thing for both the community and for the police officers.
Thank you, Congressman. Let's get to Mr. Swisher, excuse me, on that topic. What do you think needs to be done about racial injustice and policing?
Look, we have never had a fair and equitable justice system in the United States. We have one justice system for those at the top 1%, and then a justice system for everyone else. We have a justice system for white people, and we have a justice system for minorities. And so what you get in these situations, which typically involve minorities, are cops that are trying to do their job, and the minorities don't want to abide by the authority because the authority has never worked for them. It has never been just for them. And it puts the cop in a bad situation as well. So the first thing that we have to do is establish a justice system that is fair and equitable for everyone. One that holds people accountable regardless of their race, regardless of their economic status. And that includes the police. The police need to be held accountable for their actions as well. And that needs to be fair and equitable. I do think this is another area where we need to invest more in our society. This idea of defunding the police, that is really the worst semantics that has ever been created. What they're trying to do is take some of that funding and put it into social programs, social workers that actually make policing more efficient. It allows cops to focus on the things that cops are good at and takes out of their hands the things that they're not good at. Mental health issues, domestic violence, and domestic, household issues. We need to do that. And whether we get the funding from taking it from police or just simply adding more funding and more investment in our society, I think it's a move that we need to make.
Okay, all right, gentlemen, thank you. Our next topic of debate, election.
Can we respond to that just a little bit?
We are running so tight on 30 seconds.
I would say that I would hope that after listening to that answer that Mr. Swisher would support the president and his judicial reform legislation that went through. First time that's happened in a long, long time. And the president pushed that and got it through, and it does just what he addressed about the unequal sentencing and justice system that we have in this country.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. We're going to move on to another topic of debate here, and that is election integrity. Joe has that question.
All right, Kim. Well, of course, with the coronavirus pandemic and an election only 20 days away at this point, millions of Americans will be casting their ballot through the mail, those absentee ballots. Now, on that topic, President Trump has said very bluntly that he believes with the mass use of mail-in ballots that the election will be fraudulent, that there'll be mass fraud, and you may not be able to trust the results. Critics of the president say that he's gone too far, he's wrong, and he's promoting a false narrative. Now, here at home in Idaho, I've talked to the Secretary of State's office and several clerks across Idaho, and they all tell me they have confidence in the election, both at the polls and through the mail. First for you, Mr. Swisher, do you believe in the complete integrity of the 2020 November general election?
I believe in the general integrity of it. I think there are going to be problems. I think those problems will be few, but the media will probably make a lot of hay out of them. But I think for the most part, yes, we should trust our electoral system. Look, the fact that we're even discussing this is just a shame. We are one of the richest nations on the face of the planet. Our system of government is founded upon giving people the opportunity to have their say by going to the polls and voting for the people who represent them. The fact that Democrats and Republicans can't come together and make sure that this system works makes you question the belief of those folks in the system. I believe in the voting system. Until I see evidence otherwise, I think we've got a good system, and I think we need to strengthen it and improve on it.
Congressman Simpson, do you believe that President Trump has a point and there could be reason to possibly question the results or the process of mail-in ballots?
I wouldn't question the results. I don't think that's the right thing to do, but I think it's going to be a narrow election, and I think the general public is going to question it. Mail-in ballots are a problem. That's different than absentee voting. Absentee voting, you request a ballot, they send it to you, you fill it out, you send it back in. Mail-in elections that they're talking about now, they send a ballot to every registered voter in their district or in whatever the precinct is. That only works if you've purged your voting list and done it regularly. Just recently in Los Angeles, a judge ordered them to remove 1.5 million potential voters from their list because they hadn't purged their list for years. That's people that had died, people that had moved, people that weren't qualified to vote. I have an employee in Washington. She lives in Virginia. She's already received 2 ballots. And you've seen the reports of 100,000 ballots went out and oops, they forgot to put the presidential election on those. So we have to redo those. What happens to those 100,000 ballots? We've seen that happen several places. When Oregon that does and has for several years done mail-only ballots, even the Secretary of State, I think it was, that said there, it took us about 5 years to get it right.
Okay.
And now we're going to do this nationwide. That's problematic, I think.
All right, we need to get moving on. We have time for one more question because we do want to allow time for your closing statements. This one is on political climate. How can you get something done? Because it's no secret that the political climate in this country is extremely tense. On both sides of the aisle, there are politicians and voters who make it clear that they do not respect the other side, and they've made some pretty nasty remarks. As a congressman, how would you aim to work with the other side? Because as we've seen, to get important things done like COVID stimulus bills, you need to work with the other side. Can it be done, my question, or is this just the way it is now? We'll let you, Mr. Swisher, answer first.
Absolutely, it can be done. Look, you meet people and you work with people based upon the quality of their ideas and the quality of their principles, and you put the partisanship aside. I think we've got too many people in Washington who have been there for too long and are too invested in the two-party system. We need to get those folks out and get fresh folks in who aren't invested and haven't been, supported by one party or the other with tons of money for years and years and years. Look, when I talk with somebody, I don't care if they're a Democrat or a Republican. I care about whether they're just or unjust, whether they're rational or irrational. What is the quality of their thoughts? Can they think critically? That's what's important to me.
Representative Simpson, same questions to you. Can we come together? Can this be done, or is this just the way things are now?
It is more partisan now than it has ever been in the time that I've been in Congress, and that's unfortunate. There are an awful lot of people on both sides of the aisle that want to work together. On the Appropriations Committee that I serve on, we work together, both Republicans and Democrats, to come up with the appropriation bills. We do it in a bipartisan fashion. But it's not just Congress that is divided right now. The American people are divided. When you look at what's happening across this country, I'm concerned about how divided this country has become. That's reflected in Congress, unfortunately. But, I've got a history of working across the aisle. If you look at some of the legislation that I've done, it's taken bipartisan support to get it done. I don't really care where that support comes from. When I've got something that I want to do, I'll work with whoever it takes to get it done. And that's the way I've operated for the last 20 years, and that's the way I would continue to operate. But both parties have moved further to the right and further to the left and left out those people, frankly, that either have decided not to run again because it's become too partisan, or have been beat in their primaries by people on the extremes. And that's what's happened in Congress, unfortunately.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. We've heard both of you, the candidates, debate on a number of very important issues facing voters this election season, and we thank you for that. But it is time now for our closing statements. And Mr. Swisher, you get to go first.
Well, I want to thank KTVB again for putting on tonight's debate, and for the folks at home tuning in. The other night, a neighbor of mine crossed the street, and he said he noticed that I was running for Congress, and he asked what party I was from. I told him I was a Democrat. He told me that he was supporting Donald Trump for president. There was a lot we could have fought about, and there was a lot we could have disagreed about. But after talking with each other for 5 or 10 minutes, I think we both realized that we're both just working class people who feel like we've been left behind by this economy, and we're both looking for a solution. When we were done, he said he'd consider me for his vote. I know that Idaho is a Republican state, but I'm not here promising a bunch of government giveaways, a socialist system, or supporting a bunch more Antifa militants out in the street. I am Aaron Swisher. I've put together a comprehensive plan to make a fair economy, a clean environment, and a balanced budget. I don't care what party you're from. I'm asking for your vote.
All right, Mr. Swisher, thank you. Mr. Simpson, your turn now for a closing statement.
Well, again, thank you, Kim, and thank the panelists for being here tonight, and thank all of you for tuning in. And thank you, Aaron. I always enjoy our discussions on this, and I'm sure we'll have more of them in the future, regardless of who wins this election. But, I've got a history of being able to work things out for the state of Idaho and accomplishments that I'm very proud of. Whether it's the Great American Outdoors Act, which is probably the most important environmental piece of legislation that's passed since the Wilderness Act. That was a bipartisan act. I was the lead Republican, and it was based on a bill that I introduced 3 years ago. Whether it was the fix for the funding of wildfires, again, a bipartisan support bill that was supported by both Republicans and Democrats. Whether it was the Boulder White Clouds Wilderness bill that I worked on for 15 years and passed with bipartisan support in both the House and Senate. So I've got a history of working in a bipartisan fashion. As I said, I've got goals to accomplish. I've got things to do for the state of Idaho, and I will work with whoever I have to get to accomplish those goals. When you look at the growth of the Idaho National Laboratory and what's happened while I've been in Congress, that's something I'm very proud of. So, as I said, I'm proud of the accomplishments I've had for the state of Idaho, and I would ask for your vote on November 3rd.
All right, Representative Simpson, thank you. Mr. Swisher, thank you. And thank you for being with us as well tonight. And don't forget to check out KTVB's voter guide. You can find that right now at ktvb.com. Our voter guide provides you with everything you need to know this election season, including information about voter registration, how to request an absentee ballot, and much more. Again, that is at ktvb.com. Again, thank you for watching, and have a good night.